Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov chess channel, and welcome to the amazing tournament that started yesterday. Welcome to the Sinquefield Cup in 2022. So this is now a super event that's played now in a one-round robin between 10 top grandmasters, and the format is classical time format chess. So the players will have 1.5 hour for the first 40 moves, and then after the first 40 moves, they get additional 30 minutes on the clock. And always in every move you get the increment, so you basically cannot lose on time. But yesterday the event really started in a beautiful sharp way. Magnus Carlsen won his game with the white pieces against Nepomniachtchi, and we're starting now with our coverage in the round 2 with a beautiful gameplay by Nepomniachtchi against Alreza Firouzja. So this was, I think, the derby of the day. It was an incredible game, I think, with really some ups and downs. So let's see now what happened. The game ended a couple of minutes ago. So here Nepomniachtchi opened with the move d4. Here Alreza's response was knight to f6. We have the c4, and from e6, knight to f3, the anti-Nimzo or counter-Nimzo Indian setup here by Nepomniachtchi, and Alreza's response was the move d5. We are transposing now into the queen's gambit decline. So here Nepo goes for the Catalan opening, and there are several things that you can do. You can play, of course, c6 solid lines. You can play bishop to b4, this check ideas and similar stuff. Here Alreza played a very aggressive open Catalan with the move d takes c4. So he takes now the pawn, and this becomes now really an open center. Now basically he's inviting white's bishop into the game, and then with this support of the bishop, of course, white has a dominant here diagonal. On the other hand, the cool part about this move d takes c4 is that actually white in these types of structures will lose 2 tempi at least in order to recapture the pawn back. Either you will play something like queen to a4 and then queen takes c4, or you'll play queen to c2, queen takes c4, or you'll play, I don't know, knight to d2, knight to a3, and then knight takes c4. The idea to take the pawn immediately is actually just to slow down a little bit your opponent's progress, your opponent's development here on the queen side. So in the continuation, we have bishop to g2 here by Nepo. We have a6 by Alreza, preparing maybe some ideas of b5. If that happens in a good way, then of course here with the move c6, we could then maybe hang on to our pawn on c4. So white has to be also careful. If black manages to stay with the pawn on the board, then black should be slightly better. So in the continuation, we have now kingside castling. b5 actually would be very risky because of knight to e5, but this is still playable for black, because then of course c6 will happen. You have to cover the diagonal, and then after something like knight takes c6, you have to play queen to b6, and you are challenging the knight. After a couple of trades maybe of knight here, I think black should be also solid in this position. But okay, here in the continuation, after move kingside castling, Alreza didn't play this move b5. He played the normal idea here, knight to c6. He's challenging now a little bit further here the pawn on d4, and that's also a solid way to proceed here in the Catalan opening, because many times white is playing again sort of a passive move e3 just in order to fix the pawn structure first, and then wants to maybe recapture the pawn on c4 again, maybe even with some ideas of knight to d2, knight takes c4. But here Nepo goes for the sharpest line. He plays now queen to c2, and he's saying you can't take the pawn on d4, but actually when that happens, then your queen in the center is a little bit exposed. So this is not a mistake or something. This is just a sharp line of the Catalan. This is really wild what Nepo tried here, because you don't want to lose, of course, 2 pawns immediately in the early stage of the game. You have to have a decent compensation for the lost pawns, and actually the activity, the aggressive play that you can get when the queen gets decoyed towards the center is actually, I think, a decent compensation here for white. So that's why here we have knight takes d4. You see knight takes d4, queen to d4, but now with knight to d2, we are challenging, of course, now the pawn on c4, and then eventually with bishop to e3, the queen will be attacked. We have an attack here on the c file. This is still really beautiful diagonal for the light square bishop, and then of course also when we take out maybe the pawn on c4, then with bishop to f4, we can really have a beautiful attacking formation. So black has many times in these types of structures of the Catalan problems where to go with the light square bishop. The light square bishop is paralyzed a little bit by its own pawn structure. Here you have to push the pawn on e5, and b6 or b5 is never a possibility because of this attack against the rook. So you have to really be careful here what they are trying to do here on the queen side, because it's simply really solid game now for white will eventually, as I said, simply build a beautiful attacking formation. So here Alreza is saying, I am losing the pawn anyway, I will play c3. At least I'm messing up with your pawn structure here, because now after b takes c3 we have provoked at least a weakness, we have created at least an isolated pawn, an isolated c pawn. So queen to c5, knight to e4, knight takes e4, bishop to e4, and now bishop to d6 here by Alreza is of course perfectly fine. Tries of course now to castle kingside. If you play something like bishop to h7 immediately, it's not the point that we will capture, lock the bishop here like this with the move g6. Many times the bishop can be locked like this, but actually with queen to h5 the game is basically lost here for white. So far white cannot take out the pawn on h7 because you lose the tactical battle here on the h file. So this is not working. So far Nepo cannot really capture the pawn on h7. So we have now rook to b1, perfectly fine move. We are attacking now further the b7 square, but there is a rule in chat which says sometimes the execution should be a little bit prolonged. You should not rush into capturing. Sometimes the capture should be delayed a little bit. You can of course, many times in the continuation of the game, you see now that Nepo will have many times the opportunity to take out the pawn on b7, but he will not do it because he will wait for the perfect moment to do it. And you see how Nepo is really a great player, because he will really wait for the special moment when is the time to take out the pawn on b7. Here Alreza doesn't even bother to protect the pawn on b7 because he knows if he tries some ideas of b6, b5, if he tries even some ideas maybe of rook to b8, then you could get maybe some ideas of bishop to e3, then maybe the rook can be attacked by this bishop. So the rook is a little bit paralyzed here, so you don't have even time to play with the rook. That's, I think, also a thing that bothers now in black's continuation. Black has really here a lack of development. So in the continuation, after move rook to b1, we have f5 by Alreza Firouzja. I like maybe more this idea. Queen to h5. This position has been reached in a game played by Papiano against Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru Nakamura, for instance, played this move with the black pieces. The game ended in a draw. It was a solid way to proceed here. I think the queen is now a little bit provoking here, white's king side. At least you're not touching anymore your pawns. Here with the move f5, I think this is not a mistake or something. This is even not an inaccuracy, but I kind of don't like this move f5 because it's still paralyzing your light square bishop further. So your light square bishop is the worst piece on the board, and you're doing another pawn move on light squares. It is simply making this bishop much worse here in the continuation of the game. As I said, this was the tempo. You're creating an aggressive attack. Your opponent has to react after f5, but still I kind of found it very risky because the bishop on c8 is really such a bad piece. So in the continuation we have bishop to g2. Nepo is saying, okay, you got your tempo, but I'm still staying on this active diagonal. So in the continuation we have kingside castling, and now comes this idea, bishop to e3. You see Nepo's bishops are much more flexible. They're much more aggressive in the game, although white is down a pawn, but when it comes to piece activity, white is much better. So in the continuation we have queen to a5, we have c4, trying even maybe some ideas of c5, and now Alreza has to break now somewhere the position with the move f4, although there is an interesting idea that maybe Alreza could have played. It's again the move c6. Maybe you're again keeping a little bit your light squares covered. Again, you're paralyzing your light square bishop further. But now, even if something, I don't know, even if bishop to b6 happens, if your queen gets in there, then still you have some escape routes for the queen. Maybe you have can remove the queen to f6, maybe then to e7. Then you can maybe try a sort of a, I don't know, slow push here in the center with move e5, e4, f4 and similar stuff. Maybe this was the way to go. I'm not sure if this is maybe the correct way, but again with the move f4, Alreza played too aggressively because still he hasn't developed his minor pieces, all of his minor pieces. He hasn't developed the bishop. He doesn't have still a rook connection. This f4 is an aggressive move again, but actually it's causing also many problems, many position problems in the continuation of the game. And look at this, how really subtle Nepo is playing the game now. He plays now bishop to d4, provokes again a pawn move. Here after move bishop to e5, we have queen to b2 by Nepo. He's challenging now here the bishop. After bishop to d4, queen to d4. Okay, here e5 was played by Alreza Firouzja, and probably he was telling to himself, this is perfectly fine. I finally liberated now my light for bishop. Finally my light for bishop will come into the game. But actually this was really brilliant how Nepo played the game, because actually after move bishop, queen to d5, queen to d5, bishop to d5, this is now with the check, of course, king to h8, and look at this. Now it's simply time to take out here the pawn on b7. Many times you saw in the game Nepo had the opportunity to take out the pawn on b7, but now it's the correct time now, because here look at this, both of these pawns were moved to a dark squares, of course, and now we can deliver this annoying check. And now when the king is far away from the action, now it's time to take over of the open files, of the open b file, and also of the open d file, because now after bishop to b7, rook to b8, we have bishop takes c8, rook to c8, and look at this now, rook to d1. Nepo is taking over here now on the d file, and this is now a much better position here for black. Although if black probably plays a perfect game here, this should end with a draw, but this is really hard to play now, because whenever you face this rook endings, it's very important who's the first one that occupies your second or maybe your seventh rank, because this ranks you have to occupy. From white's perspective, you want to occupy, of course, the seventh rank. From black's perspective, you want to, of course, to occupy the second rank. But there is a rule: who is first on that rank will probably win the game. And I think Nepo, with this beautiful rook activity, has great opportunities to be the first one that can, of course, attack this pawns, that can attack also, of course, this pawn. This pawn is very important, the e5 pawn. So when we watch also the pawn structure, after a couple of trades of pieces, we can notice that Nepo provoked here also some weaknesses. We have isolated pawns, many isolated pawns on the board, so all of these pawns can be taken. In my opinion, here Nepo tricked really Alreza with this beautiful bishop to d5 move. So we have king to g8. So you see, Alreza has to now go back with the king, realized his lack of the activity of the king. We have now rook to b8, rook to b8, and now rook to d5. Okay, here Nepo didn't occupy the seventh rank, but he noticed that he should probably, as we said, attack this pawn. If this pawn is lost, then also, of course, this pawn is weak. So in the continuation now comes maybe one of the first mistakes that Alreza did here. He played now the move rook to b4, and actually what he should have done probably here is to play rook to b2. He should have probably again attacked more pawns, because both of these pawns are on second rank, this weak pawns, the weak pawn on e2 and also the pawn on a2. On the fourth rank we have only one pawn to attack, so it was maybe slightly better here to make a game like this, because after rook to e5 we can take, of course, you have to take it. Now we attack simply this one. Now we have attacked three pawns, and one is lost for sure. So even if, for instance, white plays here towards the queen side, we'll simply take out this one. You can maybe take out also this one, but now we're getting again behind, and now with our king we can maybe step closer, and with perfect play again probably this should end with a draw. But okay, here in the continuation, Alreza played rook to b4. He attacked now the pawn on c4. We have a rook takes e5. Now again f takes g3, and after h takes g3, finally Alreza took also the pawn on c4, and it seems so that Alreza has defended, because after rook to a5 we have this one, rook to c6. But this is, in my opinion, much better for white, because here this pawn is of course a pass pawn, and these two pawns are really connected, so you can always hide with your king here behind your pawn. So the problem I think for black in this position is when we push the pawn here on e4, f4, then there is always a route sort of in which we can escape from potential checks by opponent's rook. So on the other hand, black's king is a little bit paralyzed here. Black's king can only move to the sixth rank, because the fifth rank is of course occupied by white's rook. So when it comes to king's activity, I think that's now the most important thing here, to say white is much better because of the opportunity to hide behind this white pawn. So really great endgame strategy now will happen in this game. So here king to g2 was played by Nepo. We have king to f7, f4, we have king to e7, and now see now e4. These are flexible pawns. We can always at least create a beautiful route here. So in the continuation we have now rook to b6, and this is maybe sort of a slight inaccuracy. One of the ideas that you can play is here to play sort of a move h6, and now for instance if a4 happens, you have the opportunity maybe even to play the move g6. At least you're not allowing here your opponent to come into the game with the king. You have to now keep the king out of the game, so maybe pushing the pawns to the 6th rank where also the rook is, because the rook is now protecting all of the pawns. It should be sort of a drawish idea. But okay, here rook to b6 was played by Alreza Firouzja. We have now king to f3, rook to c6, and now f5. And this was probably now the first mistake by Nepo, because actually what he allowed here is this continuation here. Alreza had the opportunity to play the move king to f6, and this should probably, in my opinion, be a draw, because now if of course king to f4 happens, because we want to play something like g4 g5, we want to go into an opposition. Actually what black can do here as a defensive idea is to play g5 immediately, and now if you take en passant f takes g5, h takes g5, you see, with this scenario, black would dismantle, black would disconnect this beautiful pawn chain that white had a couple of moves ago. So you see, before this moves, these pawns were connected, but now after move king to f6, Alreza had the opportunity here to make a draw, but Alreza made a huge mistake. He played king to f7, and this was now, I think, really the crucial mistake of the game. I'm not sure what happened here, because with the move f5, basically, Nepo allowed here maybe a drawish position. What Nepo should have played is of course g4 here, keeping the pawns a little bit flexible, never allow this king to come. When the king comes now on f6, then we can play g5, we can again kick away the king, and now again we go with our king here maybe to g4, f5, again keeping our king active. But after move f5, as we said, king to f6 would have been the defensive idea here for Alreza, but he played king to f7. I'm not sure what happened now. This is perfectly fine. We have a g4, we have h6. Now the king is coming again towards the center. Now there is no counterplay against this e5 move, because now these two pawns will be connected already there, and it's a bad game here for black. So in the continuation, we have now king to e7. Now we have rook to a4. This is very important because Alreza will be challenged now with the move e5, and you don't want to have this annoying checks here by black, so black will not here create annoying checks. Now we can play again freely with our king. So in the continuation, king to rook to b6, rook to c4, attacking now the pawn, king to d8, and now you see e5. Really good ideas here by Nepomniachtchi. So after e5, here in the continuation, Alreza played a rook to b1, which is perfectly fine. You want to have your rook behind your enemy's position. You want to create some checks. You want to of course provoke maybe perpetuals. You want to have a drawish position here, but here Nepo played, I think, again a beautiful idea, rook to c6, keeping the rook very active. We have rook to b4, king to f3, rook to b5, and now rook to king to e4. Now Alreza played a check, but Nepo found here really a beautiful plan how to be really in a winning position in this particular game. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see a plan for you in this particular endgame. It's maybe not so easy to see, but try to see now sort of a good continuation here for white. So Nepo found this plan. This is brilliant. He played king to d5, allowed here Alreza Firouzja to take out this pawn on g4, but now he can play very active with the king. Now this pawn is hanging. What we want to do is of course play king to f7 and then let this pawn roll here on the e file and promote to queen. So this is now completely winning here for white. So king to c8 here, Nepo took the pawn on a6. We have king to b7, attacking the rook to a3. Now Alreza got behind his pawns, but it's simply too slow here after move rook to f2. Again, Nepo found a beautiful idea, f6, because the problem is now if you take here, we'll just let this pawn roll. As we said, there's no way we hid behind this enemy's pawns here. Really wild stuff how Nepo found a good defensive strategy here, and just pushing the pawn is winning for sure. So that's why after move f6 we have king to c6, and here in the continuation here Nepo simply took here the king march, but now after king to f7 in this position, Alreza Alreza Firouzja resigned. So really great game by Nepomniachtchi. I think he showed really some class. He showed also great endgame. Alreza made this mistake. He didn't move the king to f6. Still probably white was better, but this was the only defensive chance. I'm not sure what happened. Why didn't he play active with his king? But of course, Nepo played really brilliant game here. Yesterday he lost his game against Magnus Carlsen, but today he at least won the game. Has now at least 1 point out of the first 2 games. Has still also good chances maybe to win the whole tournament. So okay, as a warm-up, I think this was a beautiful game. Great, I think, played by Nepomniachtchi, the World Championship challenger of next World Championship. Maybe he'll be also the next World Champion, who knows. But Nepo is playing also great chess, and we'll see what will happen. It will be an incredible tournament for sure. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Catalan for sure. If you want to see some other commented chess games that we have covered, please check out also some of my analysis. Here's also the link of our commented chat game series, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.